Welcome to the Occult Rejects. This episode, I got a couple of rejects with us, and I got a returning guest that I'm very, very excited to finally get back on. But before we get to him, we will have the other rejects plug themselves and let them know where they can find all their work. First, we'll start off with the reject mad scientist, Lisa. What is going on? How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me on. Thank you for inviting me for Toby, and thank you to all the rejects for being here. I am very excited about Toby because after the first one, I had so many other questions. So I'm glad he's back on. And the only thing I want to plug is occultresearchinstitute.org. We have some contributors that contribute to that website. And so if you'd like to consume your content in literary form, please check us out at occultresearchinstitute.org. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And we got the man, the Headless Giant. Oh, sorry, I'm skipping Jin. I didn't have the screen up, sorry. Jin the Ninja, the man that's probably the reason why we're having the second interview with Toby, because you had brought up the whole trapezoid thing and whatever. And here we are again. So thank you, Jin. And Jin the Ninja, let everybody know where they can find all your amazing work.
Well, thank you so much, boss. And I have to say, we're having this conversation because you and obviously put it together. You invite me on, and I'm really lucky that you include me in these. These are my favorite kind of shows, like with modern America. I mean, you know this, it's just my favorite thing. So, and thank you so much, Toby, for coming on again, and thank you to all the rejects on the panel tonight. And so if you want to check me out, I'm at Wukong Reborn, WUKONG Reborn on X, Twitter, and then IG is Threshold Saints, as well as the show account at Threshold Saints. So serial experiments in speculative ontology. So I just dropped episode 48 with Alex Rivera, and we talked about a very in-depth conversation on Gnosticism and Tracy Twyman. So we kind of went right to the edge on that. So thank you, guys.
Awesome. Nice. I'm pretty sure that's a good guest to talk about Tracy too with. Good stuff. And now we're finally making it to the Headless Giant. What is going on, sir? Please let everybody know where they can find all your amazing work.
How you doing? You can find me on X at the Headless Giant. You can also find me on YouTube streaming this live. You can also send your emails to me if you've had any paranormal experiences or any kind of mysterious dreams that have stuck with you. Email me at the Headless Giant podcast at gmail.com, and I will read it on your show tomorrow with Nick. Also, if you're noticing that I wasn't on here with Toby before, that's because Ethan is having a difficult situation. So, guys, send your thoughts and prayers out to Ethan. That poor guy's been through a lot, and he's losing his father. So, just keep Ethan in your prayers.
Well said, sir. Well said. Thank you. And last but not least, we got Ricardo from the Institute for Natural Philosophy. What is going on, sir? Thank you very much for coming on again.
Oh, thank you very much for having me. Good night to all of you. I'm eager to learn from Toby that I'm just being introduced to. So you can find me at Ricardo Calvario at X, as you can see on the screen. And please check out the Institute for Natural Philosophy. That is also on X, and you can find it at institutefornaturalphilosophy.org. Check out our magazine. There is Pharaohs. It's free. It's online, and you can download it. The new issue is almost ready, perhaps one more week or so. And I just, as Headless said, I just want to share my deepest sympathies to Ethan, and to say that we are all thinking about him and what he's going through. So Ethan, wherever you are, our thoughts are with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And finally, to the guest to himself, he's returning again. We got Toby Chappell. He is an author, musician, and grandmaster of the Order of the Trapezoid within the Temple of Set. Since 2019, his book, Infernal Geometry and the Left-Hand Path, has been a go-to field manual for anyone who wants to push sacred geometry past Euclid and straight into the 9 angles. Now with a brand new volume, which we had him on last time, The Languages of Magic, Toby's doubling down on the idea that numbers, shapes, and words are tools for personal apotheosis. So please, Toby, let everybody know what your deal is and what's up with this book.
Hello, everyone, and thanks so much for having me back. I really had a great time our last conversation, and love that some questions from that conversation led to this return appearance. Since I'm talking about a book that's now hard to believe, about 6 years old. called Infernal Geometry and the Left-Hand Path. You can find it wherever you get your books. So a little bit about myself for those who didn't see this last time. So I am a semiotician. I am someone that works with and analyzes and produces signs as part of not only for my magical work, but also my general way of understanding the world around me and the people within that world. I'm also a linguist. I'm a dedicated student of language. In a formal sense, I'm actually studying that at the university level currently. So as was mentioned, I am the author of 2 books at present, which are both sort of related. They both work with a specific approach to magic and a couple of different aesthetics. The most recent book, The Languages of Magic, is a more general sort of extrapolation of what I call the semiotic theory of magic. The idea that whenever we do magic, we're working with signs as a process of communication with, first and foremost, with ourselves, but then also with the world outside of ourselves and whatever it is that we're wishing to affect. The idea that since we're in a conversation with the unmanifest, attempting to persuade it to bring forth whatever it is that we desire.
Awesome. Yeah, I would like to.
Places you can find me, and I'll maybe mention this again at the end if needed, but places you can find me online. You can find me at my older website is infernalgeometry.com. The one that I update more frequently these days is at semiurgist.com, semiurgist.com. And you can find links for me there for Facebook, X, BlueSky, an email contact link. People are welcome to email me, etc.
Awesome. And I have all of your, I think I have all those links in the show right now as we're live.
Great.
So
Perfect.
yeah, people can go check his stuff out. I do highly, highly suggest to go listen to the first episode he did. Even if you're not so much into the occult or more of a conspiracy theorist, I would even say go listen to that episode because he's pretty much saying the same thing. Sound, you're getting manipulated by sound. You know,
Well, it's about connections. Magic is
yeah,
about
yeah,
connections.
really.
So anything you can do that helps you to understand the better the connections between people, between phenomena, between the processes of the world is going to both help you to not only understand it, but also impress your will upon those things. And whether that is something you're doing for your own personal ends, or whether that's because you're part of some grand conspiracy, it's still tools you may find useful.
Yeah, no, I thought that was a really, really interesting show. So I just want to plug it again. But
That was
Toby,
a lot of fun. Very
yeah, it
interesting
was. Yeah, it really was. Toby, so what made you spend a few years to write this book? What was it that was like, you know what, I need to put passion into this idea?
Yeah, so I was first exposed to this system, which is called the Nine Angles, which is should just clarify in case there's any confusion, that has nothing to do with a certain group that has that as part of their name. They may have taken it from Michael Aquino's writings, but it's a bit unclear. But what I'm referring to is the work with the Nine Angles is a specific magical system that arises out of one primary source called The Ceremony of the Nine Angles, which was published in Anton LaVey's The Satanic Rituals. That was actually written by Michael Aquino, who at the time was a very close associate of LaVey, later branched off from the Church of Satan, and then became one of the founders of the Temple of Set. Now, what this sort of system is, it combines things like Pythagorean number mysticism, the some of the cosmicism theories of H.P. Lovecraft, and as well as of the ideas of like higher mathematics and the idea that we can work with not only the 3 dimensions that we can reach out and touch, but also higher dimensions as well, in order to find certain gateways into understanding that are maybe not accessible through ordinary means. And Aquino didn't write this originally with the intent to create a magical system. He was writing a specific ritual, kind of a Lovecraft-themed ritual at LaVey's request. And it was sometime later that really when Stephen Flowers, who I understand will be a guest on your show soon, became part of the Temple of Set in the mid-1980s. One of the things that drew him to it was finding out that Aquino wrote this originally, but also wanting to know more about what this thing was and seeing the operative potential within it. And I first became aware of it at the time, not long after I joined the Temple of Set, which was in 2000. And there was not really a lot written about it at that time. There were bits and pieces, articles that Flowers and others had written, but no one had really made a decided attempt to pull it into like a larger system. And that was something that within the Order of the Trapezoid, which is part of the Temple of Set, some people began to experiment with. We did a lengthy series of workings, nine years worth of magical workings related to exploring ideas around the angles. And it was somewhere in the middle of that I began to realize that I was finally getting my head wrapped around it after, oh, I don't know, probably 12 or so years of exposure to it at that point. And as would explain some of the ideas to other people that I knew within the order, people suggested, "Oh, you need to write some of this down. We don't have anything that puts all these things together. It's hard to find the pieces. It's hard to kind of put them together on your own." And so I began thinking about that originally just as, hey, let me just kind of write down what I know and start trying to fill in the gaps on these pieces of it. And then as that developed, it became a larger scale work. And then it suddenly dawned on me that given that this is something that, the original Ceremony of the Nine Angles was from 1972, and so we're talking about 2014 at this point. So I have all these years of when people within the temple and maybe beyond as well had been working with this. It made me realize that, well, maybe it's time to put some of this out into the world. Not all of it, because there's some stuff that's left out of the book on purpose. And there's some stuff that's continuing to be developed. The book is a snapshot in time of really the period from 2014 2016, when I was the bulk of when I was writing it. So things have changed. It's a living system, so it continues to be developed. And then that's when it occurred to me that putting this out in the world in some way might make sense. And then with some assistance from Stephen Flowers, actually, to whom I'm extraordinarily grateful for that, many things, was able to get this picked up by Inner Traditions, and then published in 2019.
That was awesome. Yeah, I've listened to a few interviews with Don Webb and Flowers, and they've both actually mentioned you, giving you a lot of credit for your intellect. So
Yeah,
so must be onto something.
I stand on the shoulders of giants. I mean, they're both very important to me as mentors and as friends. I've spent time in both their homes, graciously on their part, and have learned quite a bit from both of them, as well as from Michael Aquino himself, who Dr. Aquino did. He contributed a foreword to Infernal Geometry, and he did receive a copy before he passed in 2019. So he was very supportive of that as well.
Awesome. Did anybody have any questions before we continue?
I got a quick question. So about methodology, I kind of see where you're coming from. The Greeks had something called isopsophy, where they would be equating numbers with letters, because the two are the same. They had, their numbers were their letters. So they had this very quick system of changing perspective from, the mathematical, the geometrical, back to the linguistic, almost, instantaneously. And you could see them writing isopsophy in places like the Herculaneum, where they would have graffiti talking about a person's number and how in love with that person's number they are. And so it's a completely different kind of perspective of associations, at least within the Greek world. Is this utilizing somewhat of that shift in perspective?
Not directly, but it's kind of cut from the same cloth in a sense. Draws very heavily on the ideas from the Pythagoreans around what you might call their arithmothesy. That, or arithmetic, I'm stumbling on the word here, approach to numbers, where it's not about like, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I have 6, coconuts or whatever. But it's about the ideas of oneness, two-ness, three-ness, and four-ness. So when you start to look beyond just not what numbers reveal to us in the way they relate to concrete things in the real world, but when they relate to the idea of the number itself, the idea of what does it mean to be a unity, what does it mean to be a duality, What does it mean to be a triad, and so forth. You start to open up beyond just what you can gain from interacting with what's in the world to now you're interacting with what we're able to perceive with mind, but depending on what relationship you think number has to the the underpinnings of the universe itself, you could also see that as the kind of like gateways and understanding this at a more sort of cosmic level in a sense. The idea of the concepts behind numbers instead of just the brute force of a number of something is three of something. With the Pythagoreans, they were, they had, the monad, the dyad, the triad, and so forth, all the way up to the decad. And then it kind of repeats. So the 10th was sort of the kind of perfection beyond the 9th, but also the gateway to like a new emanation of number within it. So it just kind of repeated. Now within the way that I tend to approach that type of working with number as a conceptual tool, I mean, I think of it in terms of 9 because I think partially because we use a base 10 system, so that makes 9 the so-called kind of magic number, the one that returns to itself, as Anton LaVey would say. That's the idea that if you multiply some number by any number that's a multiple of 9, if you add up the digits, that sum of those digits will also be a multiple of 9,
Yeah.
right? Like 117, 1 plus 1 plus 7, so it means it's multiple of 9. And so that becomes useful to me as like in terms of like cyclical thinking, the idea of what has already come into being, what can now remanifest in some way, perhaps in a new version of itself, or even perhaps as a new creation in and of itself. And so for me, that idea that from the Pythagoreans about 9 and 10, of 9 is sort of the culmination, and then 10 is the rarefied beyond, that's the beginning to a new cycle. I sort of tend to combine those into one, but that's just a minor kind of modification of what they were doing. But if you read through in the Ceremony of the Nine Angles, one of the things that Michael Aquino was very influenced by, beyond the obvious H.P. Lovecraft, was specifically the Pythagorean number mysticism of the monad, the dyad, and so forth. There's a central part of the Ceremony of the Nine Angles, which is, by the way, if someone has the book Infernal Geometry in the Left-Hand Path, that's printed in its entirety at the front of the book. You don't have to have LaVey's book to get a copy of it. Of course, everything's online these days anyway. But
Yes.
anyway, there's a critical passage in the Ceremony of the Nine Angles, which is come to be known as the bond of the nine angles. And this is sort of relating in Lovecraftian terms what the numbers 1 through 9 mean in that context. But if you read closely, it's also in Pythagorean terms. So for example, from the first angle is the infinite, wherein the laughing one doth cry and the flutes wail into the ending of time. So the laughing one is Azathoth, he plays the flute, that's part of Lovecraft. But that's also that idea of a unity, a oneness, that's the seed from which everything else expands. From the second angle is the master who doth order the planes and the angles, who hath conceived the world of horrors and its terror and glory. That's about Yog-Sothoth, which is sort of a not conscious entity in Lovecraft's world, but it's sort of like that kind of bridge between the cosmic void of Azathoth into the more sentient arrangements of matter and thought that arise out of that, and so forth. If you so that's not an accidental kind of thing. That was a very deliberate thing that Michael Aquino encoded into it. So it wasn't so much on as the Greeks would use the isopsophy with the numbers, letters representing the numbers per se, but it's still taking that idea of there's something about counting that lets us relate ourselves to the universe in a way that we can't do without that concept. And that's what's developed in this kind of Lovecraftian sense. So it's a bit of kind of like ideas from Pythagoras, an aesthetic and cosmology from Lovecraft, and then filtered through things like Anton LaVey's law of the trapezoid and related things. So it's kind of like this kind of amalgam of a few things coming together.
So, if I may, Toby, I'm particularly interested in everything that is related to frequency, for instance, and frequency is sound. So how would you explain to those listening to us what is the importance of the wording, or how do you express yourself when you are using the linguistics to convey meaning or purpose in these magical practices?
For sure. And one thing I didn't mention in my introductions, I'm a musician. I've been a guitarist for, 30 something years at this point. So I'm a longtime musician, both not only playing, but also composing, recording, et cetera. And so that sort of Pythagorean musical cosmos idea is kind of, it's always in the back of my mind, even when I'm not writing about that sort of thing explicitly. So one of the things that's worth noting, and this is something that pops up in the Greek magical papyri in a very real sense as well, is the idea of sort of the differences between consonants and vowels in our speech. With consonants, we're stopping the flow of air, where to greater or lesser extent. And then the vowels, we're kind of flowing in between the consonants. They're more about the flow of breath outward, where um, with the tongue, we're shaping the vocal cavity, and then and that's what is causing the the uh, the sound of the individual vowels. Now that's interesting, right? Because you're talking about a continuity versus the discontinuity there. Continuity being the vowels, and the continuity being the consonants. And my
Would that be
feeling,
the silence in the music? Would that be the silence in the music, for instance? Because in music there is no vowels or consonants.
right? Right. When you expand it beyond just spoken language into sound, yeah, that becomes the silences versus the sound. Or you could also think of maybe like a percussive sound as more like a consonant as well. But right, that same sort of dichotomy between unrestricted flow and restricted flow. Right. And I think that interplay is very important to magical work. It's also very important to our thought processes. It's also very important to, of course, it's very important to speech. Um, as far as the magical part of that goes, I mean, as this fairly well known, the Pythagorean ideas about the music of the spheres, the idea that the different parts of the cosmos are tuned in a sense. And this was, while that was speculative for the most part in their time, we now know, of course, this is literally true. We have, for example, the orbits of the planets, move in according to certain formulas that describe how gravity moves the planets around the sun. But you can also even stack them up and go, well, this orbit is this many times, or has this relationship, this proportion to this other orbit, etc. And I've heard people do this, and I've also done a bit of this myself, of kind of using those relationships and using them to create music. So you're literally kind of listening to that music. Take the same proportion between the notes, the proportions between the frequencies. So I think that becomes another way to relate to the universe around us, to relate our thought processes to what is the underlying reality that is part of the physical makeup of the universe there.
So
Yeah.
if I told you that, for instance, there are monuments that are built to reflect architecture into sound in the 4/3 scale, how would you relate that as important factor? Have you found that in your research?
Yeah, you might have stumped them.
Yeah.
I'm
Well,
thinking.
I'm sorry, I shut you up, Toby. I'm sorry.
No, it's good. I'm thinking through a couple of, I have like 5 thoughts that are going different directions. I'm trying to decide which one to take.
It runs away too fast.
Yeah, well, welcome to my world. I think the point I want to kind of pursue a little bit on that is about relationships, about finding the way that things relate to each other. There's different ways that you can do that. You have visual cues about the things you encounter, but there's also like in terms of sound, we find certain sounds harmonious as opposed to others. I mean, Pythagoras wrote extensively about this, of course, and this pops up a lot in Plato as well, especially the dialogue, the Timaeus, where he literally describes the formation of the cosmos, where a portion of the unmanifest is carved out to form part of the universe. Then this other progressive function is carved out, etc. And if you read what he describes as the specific portions, they're going in a Pythagorean musical scale. You know, where you have the thirds and the fifth, and the octave, and so forth. And then, so it was almost like they're using different languages for looking at the same thing in a sense. Let's look at this mathematically. This is that we can see these things about it this way. Look at this musically, we can see these things about it. And that's why those sciences were so closely connected. The idea that geometry and astronomy and music were all different ways of looking at the same types of relationships, the same types of understanding, the same attempt to understand the universe.
Robert Flood was big with that. I'm pretty sure you know who that is.
Oh yes, yeah. The
Huge.
Neoplatonists, especially the ones that popped up in the early modern period. Flood, Giordano Bruno, even Kepler, Johannes Kepler, who worked out the mathematics behind the planets, behind the orbits of the planets, were hugely informed by this Platonic, or really Pythagorean, but they got it through Plato. This way of looking at the universe as this interplay between proportions, this interplay between mathematical relationships. It was part of what Galileo would called it reading the book of nature. The idea that we can perceive nature in certain ways that are part of our own natures, but that through that we have to read what it's trying to say, and the way we do that is we have to learn its language. And for many of those guys, its language was mathematics, and so that's why you see such mathematically precise approaches to music, to astronomy, and so forth, because it was all part of that underpinning of what was really making up the universe was mathematics to them.
Sure. So that would be the inclusion of animism into this process, this magical process. Would you say that? Like conveying life to words into meaning. Like when you create a spell, you have to it's a complex process of creating intention through the meaning of the language into the rhythm and the frequency of the sound itself for a desired effect. Would you say that?
Yes, very, very much. There's the idea of the logos, right? The transcendent word that is sort of the part of the makeup of the cosmos, and that when we work with words, we're working both with the words that we're speaking. We're also working with the deeper meaning behind those words. We're also working with the transcendent idea of what it means to speak things into being to begin with, which is a very important idea in ancient cultures. You see it very explicitly in ancient Egypt, with the idea that Thoth, or Jute, literally writes things into reality, that it doesn't occur until he writes it in his book. You see things like in the Babylonian world with the creation epic, the Enuma Elish, which starts off with the very idea that before the sky above had a name, before the gods had names, the idea that they have to be named into being. So there's something transcendent and foundational about the word itself that we have to, just like with Plato carving off parts of the cosmos, describing the carving off parts of the cosmos, we have to carve off part of the transcendent word to make it the immanent word that we actually work with. And yes, frequency is part of that as well. There are the idea that the not only the alphabet or the other writing system that words may be written with, but also the frequencies with which they're spoken and the relationships between the different words. That's such an ancient idea in the way that the language. It's been largely kind of supplanted, partially because language and writing are so widespread now. We don't think of them as weird things, even though reading and writing is extraordinarily weird.
Would you
so like we have to dig back deeper to understand like how what we've lost about understanding through these ways of interacting with the world. Sorry, Lisa, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No, I was interrupting you. Would you say that going back, building on what you and Ricardo were talking about, would you say that vowels shape the word in so much that it creates memory of its backbone, so that when you remove the vowels and you just see the consonant, you can still read the word? And the same thing with music. Music shapes air in so much that whenever you don't hear the music anymore, you still can manipulate it in your brain. It has memory. Would you say that the vowel itself does that?
Yeah, well, humans are great at finding patterns. That's part of the weird conceptual apparatus that we have, is that we see patterns even when they're not there. I mean, that helps with things like a letter is left out of a word or some sound is left out. You even have, I mean, these days, like when you listen to like an MP3 or streaming music, it's such high resolution, this is not an issue. But like in the early days of that, when you had very low resolution sound files, your ear's filling in gaps that aren't stuff that's not there. All right. But we're so good at finding patterns, even when they're not there, that there's a certain amount of capacity for misfiring that's built in, because it's better to think you see a pattern and react to it than to miss the pattern, right? So it's part of our kind of evolutionary conception as well, our evolutionary development. The idea, like if you're in the grass and you think you see a snake, well, it's better to just react immediately as if the snake's there. Then when you notice later, oh, that was really just a branch or whatever, it's like, that's cool, but that's a much better situation than it was a snake and you didn't notice, right? So we have this kind of built-in error rate in our pattern recognition, so which can be exploited magically. It can be exploited through propaganda, exploited through conspiracy. There's lots of ways that's used against us, but that's also one of our sort of magic powers, if you will, is that we can take from things that there may be missing some parts of information, and we can fill it in based off of our experience, what's likely to be there. It's a combination of like experience and reasoning through what may be there. I mean, one of the reasons, this is not the same with all alphabets, or more usually referred to as abjads, that leave out the vowels, like with Arabic and Hebrew, for example, two well-known examples. In a lot of cases, there's only one choice for the vowel anyway, so it's not even like you have to write it down in many cases. Now, there are other places, and you see this quite a bit in the Torah, where they actually play with the idea that, oh, well, depending on which vowel you fill in here, it could mean this, it could mean this, it could mean this. And so it's kind of like a puzzle for the reader to figure out. And even sometimes, like, there is no right answer. There's different ways to interpret this, because it's literally could be one or the other. So yeah, so like it's really interesting. The move from the move to like a fully phonetic alphabet is actually, it's a really weird move in human history that has certain advantages, because now some things are not left to guesswork, but it also kind of takes away some things, because like that ability to play with ambiguity of well, it could be this, it could plausibly be this or this, and now you can read it two different ways as a result.
So
Yes,
you
it's
think
fascinating? Yeah.
you think we can use our current language to create a magic expression or spell, or are the ancient languages more proper to do it, and the creation of our language is somehow to remove that magical ability from that intention or expression?
Well, I think you can use any symbol system whatsoever for that. And I'm counting language as a symbol system. Because in semiotics regards itself as regards that linguistics is actually a subset of semiotics. It's one particular system of applied science. Now, being able to use it is not the same as it being the best tool, right?
Sure.
Right. I mean, and that's the same, like, like anyone that speaks multiple languages knows very well that you lose certain things in translation. There's some things you can translate. It's easy to translate hard concepts, translate the glass, you're right. Translating what the glass means, like what significance it has in a situation, that's maybe where some things get lost in translation, or you can't quite express things in the same way. I mean, as far as there's any perfect language for magic, my personal feeling is that there isn't, but I think that there may be. I think that you can look at some situations where the perfect language is the one for that. For example, in the Ceremony of the Nine Angles, when Michael Aquino first wrote it, he wrote it out in English, and you realized something was missing.
Hmm.
Wrote it entirely in English, and then he started to play around with, Lovecraft didn't fully develop like a language in his books to the same extent that somebody like J.R.R. Tolkien did, but there are a few pieces here and there. Um, in a few of the stories. And so Aquino kind of took those, kind of made up some of his own words, used some things in the same kind of patterns to kind of create. Well, if you had a fully fleshed out language of the great old ones, what might it be like? Including the ideas, for example, that they they don't have the same vocal apparatus as humans do, so that so maybe there's some sounds we can make that they can't, and vice versa. And so he described it as that in the Ceremony of the Nine Angles, he described it as it's an approximation as best we can do for the language of the great old ones. Because he realized that English alone didn't convey the ideas he was trying to do. And in fact, if you read his instructions for that ceremony, it explicitly says that you're supposed to read through the English part beforehand, but then when you actually do the ceremony itself, you do it exclusively in the Ugothic language, as he described
Hmm.
it. And I've been part of that before, where we've done exactly that. And it's weird. Like at first, you're you're just like hearing gibberish almost, but then you start sort of like what Lisa was saying, like you start to pick up on patterns, you start to notice repeating little bits here and there, you start to notice certain sounds go with certain other sounds, and when you start to kind of get that more sense of a flow for it, like it enhances what you're doing in a way that if I was reading the translation of this at the same time, like it just wouldn't have the same effect. So I think that there's no universal like this is the best language for doing magic in, but I think that depending on the situation, there are certainly options that are more effective in certain circumstances than others might be. Same sort of thing with the Catholic Mass and Latin. A lot of people, one of the reasons there's a lot of reaction against the doing the Mass in the vernacular was that people felt they were missing something. The idea that even if they understood what it meant, just the different sonorities that you were hearing from it, something felt missing when you take that out and you're just hearing the same thing in English.
Sure. I asked because when we hear something, for instance, in ancient Norse, or you hear something
Hmm.
in ancient. Um, I need help here. What's the name of it? Well, I can't remember. But for instance, in what we believe was ancient Egypt, or what is to speak in tongues, there is a certain raspiness, and it combines it with all kinds of tones that are different, while our language is more linear, so it can't reach everywhere.
Right.
So it's a more neutral frequency instead of having the really deep sounds and those high pitches that you can get from these ancient languages. So like the language of the Torah that I can't remember right now. I'm sorry, I can't remember the name. I'm getting a blank. And my question was exactly that. And you answered it, because in English, as in most modern languages, is a like a monotonic tone. Like I am speaking now, and it
Right.
doesn't seem that I'm going up and down in my sounds on my tones. So it's
Hmm.
monotonic, almost like. And ancient languages are not like that. They go deep down, they go up, they vary, and you can convey meaning to that intention, or even purpose to what you're saying, that accompanies with with a self-actuation that you are trying to convey through
Hmm.
what you are speaking. And that was my question. Thank you for
Sure.
answering that, Toby.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
nice.
Well, I mean, you have in at least in what's considered sort of standard North American English, you have, I think it's somewhere around 56 sounds, give or take, variety of consonants and vowels. But that's only a small number of the possible sounds that the human vocal apparatus can make. So if you
Sure.
think about it, if you're speaking any language, and there's no language that uses every possible sound that humans can use. If you think about it, you're always cutting off some of the possibilities, whatever language you're using. Um, and as well, like you very good example of that is when you have like a tonal language versus a non-tonal language. English is a non-tonal language. Something like Mandarin is a tonal language. Vietnamese, etc. It's very common in Asian languages. The idea that the same sounds spoken at a different pitch now change meaning as well. Um, so yeah, so you're always limiting your possibilities somewhat, but just like the following on with Lisa's question, you're always filling in some gaps too, because you know that there are things that can be there that are maybe not as obvious, or things that you fill in, or maybe you speak another language that uses some different sounds from English, and like you think you hear a sound from the wait, that doesn't go in English because your ear has accustomed to hearing that sound in a certain way and kind of filled in the gap there.
It's interesting just from my own practices, I guess, from doing like a lot of Kabbalistic stuff and using the Tree of Life a lot when I would do like the hexagram ritual or whatever. Yeah, using Hebrew a lot and then switching back to like speaking English a lot. I actually
Hebrew. That was it. Hebrew. Thank you.
It kind of actually like fucked me up. It's like I was realizing like I think I was almost incorporating certain both, and it just I don't know how to explain it. But there was something else I wanted to say that I found interesting. It was a little bit farther back, and it made me think like you were talking about, I guess, like the brain kind of like getting confused and maybe lying to you. And then I was like thinking about sound, and like a few weeks ago while we were podcasting, I had like the sink on and it was running water, but a little bit, and I didn't know. And I'm sitting here, and throughout like the whole show, my brain is hearing that, and I am like wondering everything that it could be. Is it something hitting the floor? I'm looking outside thinking, oh no, it sounds like it's coming from outside. Eventually, after the show's over, I'm walking around and I'm still looking and I'm listening. And I'm like, yo, it sounds like a static TV. And I start to walk into the kitchen, and as soon as I see that water coming out of the faucet, the sound fucking changes to sounding like water hitting the fucking sink.
Yeah, you caught it in the act, right?
Yeah, so my brain was able to make sense of what it was going on now, because it had thought, how many other things possible until it saw the water falling out of the faucet. Did not sound like water.
Well, if you think about it, you think about like you were trying to find it based off the information you had. Then when you saw it, now you had a piece of information that was missing that now fills in that gap, and that was they kind of let you now see it for what it really was.
It was weird experience. I was like, wow, now it sounds like water. Yeah. And then one more thing I just wanted to add. I think it was something that I think maybe Ricardo was getting at. And I don't know if anybody here might think, maybe I'm onto something, or maybe it's just, whatever, an idea. And with Old Dirty Bastard from Wu-Tang, with his style and the stuff that he used to do, I was like, yo, that guy knows what he's doing with those ups and downs. He's not playing fool. Yeah, so I've often wondered about like was Old Dirty Bastard doing that Wu-Tang?
Sure. It's like Toby, for instance, in the Hagar Queen ruins, you find depictions of these very, and forgive me, I'm not criticizing, these very fat ladies on these stones. They are depicted there, and for many people, these are considered to be the real sirens. So they would sing. Groups of these ladies would sing with their powerful voices into the temple, and the temple would reflect this sound into the sea, that can be used either to call ships into the rocks, or to make people mad while they are at sea and causing the myths of the sirens, right? So depending on what kind of magic you're trying to create, you have to use the right tool for the job. So, and the right tool may include the person, the tone, the language, may include all of that. That in base was what I was trying to convey since the first question.
Yeah. I mean, that's one reason to study language as a phenomenon is you broaden your palette of what's there, and you have find new pieces that you can use to create something new.
I had a question. So you were talking about the Reliant language. Is that the Cthulhu language that you got?
Yeah, Aquino usually called it Ugothic, but yeah, it's sort of same idea.
It's kind of interesting because you've got the glossolalia, like in the PGM, like you referenced earlier, where they have these long strings of different vowel sounds that are supposed to be doing something, but it's not too obvious exactly what it is that they meant in the translation.
Right. Some of those words are borrowed and either directly or like in a corrupted way from other languages around them, because there was this very deep idea that foreign things are magic, foreign gods, foreign words, foreign ways of writing, etc. Um, and yeah, some of it is probably is glossolalia, who are speaking in tongues, um, and one of the things I do find fascinating is the way that they do use the vowels, because you'll see like strings of vowels, and sometimes you'll see them even they'll have like ordered arrangements of vowels, like in a pyramid, or things like this, that are not just on the written page. It's like as part of the ritual, you're supposed to write that yourself as part of going back to the idea of Thoth writing things into reality. You're taking something abstract, the sound, and now you're literally writing it into the fabric of the universe as part of this ritual. So you're connecting what's within you with like the world that's outside of you as part of it. I think that combined with the ideas like the continuous nature of vowels and the unrestricted nature of the way we articulate them, I think all those are would have been part of the toolkit they were drawing from when someone was working with one of those rituals and taking all these pieces and putting it together, because it's a very syncretic thing. There's lots of stuff that's pulled in from different places and different traditions, and you have some things that are like seem to be different rituals that were crammed together, like the rite of the headless one. Um, so um, it's a very kind of like kitchen sink approach to magic about, oh, wait, this works. All right, I'm using it. Right, because it's very pragmatic. It's around what works. But that idea that underlying so many of the rituals in the PGM is the idea that words are magic, in and of themselves. The idea that I can make these sounds, and now it carries not just the meaning, like a mundane meaning of what this thing is, but it also carries this conceptual meaning that I'm bringing to it, that I'm adding as part of the meaning. That's the core. When I talk about the semiotic theory of magic, that's the core of what I'm talking about, is that we use signs of any type, whether it's words or something written or sound, etc., and we're overloading it with meaning. We're giving more meaning beyond just what is already inherently part of it or what is conventionally part of it, but using that to to carry our intent.
Sure. Look, I understand very little of all of this, but I always saw language in terms of magic as a way of conveying sound and transforming to a key that will fit a whole that is cosmic and unique to that specific key that you are creating. So the more perfect the key is, the closer you get to open the door that you're trying to open, figuratively
Absolutely.
speaking.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, some of that, and I talk about that in the languages of magic. Some of that's about communication theory, the how we communicate. There's an idea in different communication theories, and there are a lot of communication theories, but there's an idea that's common to a lot of them, the idea that there has to be some level of similarity between conversants. The idea, like for example, we're speaking English, right? And so like the extent to which you and your listeners are able to understand me is going to be largely a function of their own ability to understand and speak English. So we have to have some level of similarity. If I started speaking German, maybe fewer listeners understand what I'm saying because they don't speak German, right? So there's the idea that communication doesn't have to be exact equals, but they have to be somewhat relative equals in order to even have the ability to understand. And the semiotic theory of magic, one of the parts of it is that you're in communication with something, whether it's with your current or future self, whether it's with the unmanifest world, whether it's with someone that you're attempting to work some type of magic on to behave in a certain way, etc. But if you're not communicating effectively with them, if you're not, broadly following the rules of the language you're speaking, and the person or the thing you're talking to doesn't understand it, then you're not going to get your point across. And that's very much like what you're saying, the idea that you have to find the thing to which your partner communication will be responsive. And that's the case whether it's, ordering your coffee at Starbucks, or whether it's impressing your will in the universe as part of magic. So these things they build on it. So like in the languages of magic, and really, this started in Infernal Geometry. The Languages of Magic, my second book, is in some ways it's an outgrowth and a generalization of some of the ideas in Infernal Geometry. But that idea that you build on a foundation of effective communication, and then you add onto that magical intent. You add onto that ways of speaking and communicating that are peculiar to magic, that maybe don't make the same amount of sense, or maybe don't have the same effect, or have the same meaning outside of a magical context. And the effectiveness of your magic will largely be a function of the effectiveness of the communication that you put the magic into. So yeah, so what you're saying is absolutely in line with the way that I've been approaching magic, and I agree absolutely with all the stuff that you're saying there.
Thank you. So you would say that the cosmos or the fabric of reality doesn't have a specific requirement for language, but a specific requirement for a tone or a frequency, or that doesn't have to be connected to a specific language, but can be adapted? Or does it mean that when we look at the ancient languages, they were actually looking for that exact same match to the language of fabric of reality, to break it and bend it to their own intentions?
Well, one of the things about communication that's always conditioned by context, right? So the context affects the meaning of what's said. Sort of the idea of like, if you say certain words in a magical working, they don't have the same effect or the same intent as you've said them if you just stand up in the subway and say the same thing, right? So what you're saying, I would say broadly yes, but I would add the caveat that it's always going to be context specific, not just the specific thing that you're trying to do that's magical, but also the specific circumstances of when and how you're doing it as well. So like for example, if I would not use the same words and gestures and etc. if I'm doing a working in the middle of the shopping mall as when I'm doing a working in my apartment, right? And it's not because I care what people think or whatever, but it's because there are other parts of the situation of being out in the world that affect what I'm trying to say, the meaning of what I'm trying to say, in ways that are different than if I am, underneath the night sky or whatever. So yeah, so I don't think there's a single universal that like if like you do this and you're always guaranteed to have success. But I think that it is, and this is part of the experimental nature of magic, is that you have to have enough tools in your bag so that you can figure out what tools are going to work right now in this particular situation to get the result that I'm looking for, knowing that even if you try to do the same thing tomorrow night, you may need different tools because other things may have changed around the context. Does that make sense? So like
Sure.
so it's not like it's like okay, I figured it out, now I just keep doing this and I'm set. It's you have to kind of figure it out each time, but there will be things that you can draw on that are perennial favorites, that will tend to have an effect. And that's part of like knowing your own style of magic, but also knowing like what works best with the types of things you're trying to work magic for. Because like if you're trying to, I don't know, just picking like stuff from the magical papyri, if you're doing like a spell to enhance your memory, then you're going to approach that a different way than if you're doing a spell because I need a lever, right? Some of those may work on both, not going to judge, but all those things are part of the context, right? So the thing I think that people make a mistake with magic a lot, and this is something to ask Don Webb about too, specifically, because I'm going to blame him for this idea, is the idea that if you just have the right cookbook, then you're set, right? Yeah, and it's more that the cookbook like gives you the things to pull from to you to kind of mix it up in the pot the right way you need it tonight. Sort of like, you may have like a recipe, you make the same recipe a bunch, and you're like you know what, tonight I want more cilantro, right? So like you're responding like the needs at the moment even if you're relying on something that you've had lots of success with, that you know is a good general framework for you, you still have to kind of think about what does it need now and what's going to be most effective at this point in time. Right.
Sure. So you think that architecture was developed in terms of temple construction, was developed to enhance that effect, to help the lack of ability of the languages as it evolved in order to compensate for that. And so the ambient that is created by expressing yourself within this specifically made structures that convey some resonance, some harmony, it was specifically to enhance that inability of the language or the human being in itself. Why the use of a choir or the echo or
In some cases, definitely. I mean, the Greeks were masters of that. The way that they constructed amphitheaters and so forth, and the masks that people wore to help them project or to help them make or not make certain sounds was very much part of that. I've not studied that extensively. My feeling, and this is just me kind of going off the top of my head, so don't shoot me if there's a academic paper that says this is nonsense. Um, is that in a lot of cases that would have been part of the consideration. But the thing is, I think in a lot of cases, things were built in certain ways just because that's the way we built that. You know, it wasn't so much, or maybe they had forgotten at one point we did it this way for a specific reason, but now I just build it that way because that's the way we build those things. So
sure,
so that's what I mean when I say that, like in some cases, absolutely definitely the case, and others maybe not so much. Like for example, one of my favorite sort of modernish examples of that is in the underground chamber at the Wewelsburg Castle. You know, if you want to get your conspiracy listeners going big time.
it's a hypogeum.
Well, because within that, it's actually constructed so that the light converges in the center of the room and the sound converges in the center of the room. So they're like, if you're standing in the middle, and I've been there and I've tested this for myself. If you're standing in the middle, then if someone's speaking in a whisper at the other end of the room, you can hear it just like they're right there in your ear. And you take a step off the center, and the effect is gone.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. So things like that, like that deliberate sound design, and is absolutely there in many temples.
Sure. Al-Saflieni, when the person is inside the oracle room and the oracle is on the outside with the niche and is speaking to the niche, the persons that are inside the oracle room would understand perfectly what is he saying, but everyone that is outside that room would hear gibberish, literally gibberish, right?
It mixes up the sounds, right?
Exactly. So
yeah.
That's in the case. Sorry, in the case of amphitheaters, with or without a mask, what we can't exactly understand is how you can whisper in the stage, and the person that is further from the stage on the top stair would hear that whisper as it was being said to his ear, right? And it's an open space, right? So there's magic in the space itself. Let's put it that way. So
yeah. I mean, a lot of that, like today we understand enough about acoustics to explicitly, like, mathematically design such spaces, and I think some of that knowledge was known. Some of the mathematical how sound moves and why was known, like in ancient Greece, for example. But a lot of it would have just been experimental. I think once it may have been something somebody stumbled across by accident, and then was like, oh, that's cool, we got to keep doing that. And then they kind of build it into the way that they do things. Because that's one of the wonderful things about the way humans build on the products of human culture is we kind of borrow bits and pieces and we go, oh, I like that. Oh, I like that. Let's put those together and see what happens. And so, like, you know, they become part of the architectural language, if you will, about how you build such spaces.
A diffusion, basically.
Yeah.
Would you say, Toby, or would you agree with the idea that perhaps syntax and perhaps even grammar itself arises in synthesis? Like the convergence of the light and the sound, like when you were giving the example of the castle?
In some cases, yeah. I mean, in the way most languages sort of came about, a lot of that is just historical happenstance. There's not a lot. Most languages are far less designed than you might assume, especially given like, when you say these are the rules about how the syntax works for this, there's a difference between prescriptive and descriptive linguistics, where you're describing this is how they ended up with the word order in English or whatever. And then there's prescriptive, which is like your third grade teacher telling you not to end a sentence with a preposition, right? There's no inherent reason why you have to say that you can't end a sentence in English with a preposition. That's just that somebody decided that's what we're going to do now. Actually, in emulation of Latin was where a lot of that stuff came from. Same thing with splitting infinitives. But the thing is, and this goes back to some of the pattern recognition discussions we were having, I think once certain patterns in language like that are understood, you can now start to work with them as if they were put there deliberately. But we forget sometimes that just because I can work with this as if this was a deliberate choice, it doesn't necessarily mean that was the case. It just means that it has that effect for me in the way that I use it.
No, that makes a great deal. Oh, sorry, Joey. I apologize.
No, you're good.
I just want to say that makes a great deal of sense to me what you said, because there's an idea in Tantra that perhaps like what you're saying, like this layer of consciousness, you're seeing the word order for the first time, but you're perceiving it in a subtle way, maybe a magical sense or hermeneutic sense. Like you're seeing what the language means or the logos behind it, perhaps even. And then you're able to remix it. You're able to change the grammar. So this is related in Tantra to rajas, or the music, like the Indian ragas, but obviously we're thinking of it in a more transgressive or tantric way. So it's not like court music, but perhaps it's taking the form of court music. And then like what Don Webb talks about, he's creating like a parafiction by remixing real things in a different order, changing the syntax. And when you were giving the example of like magic, perhaps you're walking the mall. I know nobody goes to the mall anymore, but we'll go with that metaphor. It's a
well,
good.
I'm old, so examples from my youth, right?
So you would draw from the things that like you were saying, like as someone, I also pray, like Nick was saying, I also pray in other languages that I don't actually speak. So that's interesting. And I know from other people who are interested in Temple of Set materials that they basically always emphasize the idea of a malleability, a kind of like flexibility, of consciousness, of like how can you. I always call it the tree because I'm a little more into the traditional Kabbalah, but I'm trying to be flexible in my articulation of the other systems as well. So, but yeah, you have to be able to. I'm going to use a poor metaphor, but skin the tree and then also be able to kind of zip it back up and then say, "This is my formulation." But you're drawing from real things. So I just want to say that I thought that was very profound that you said that, Toby. But the linguistics element, even though I am multilingual, is a little outside of my purview. But I think the semiotics angle that you're bringing is really interesting. And I wanted to know if Marshall McLuhan's work, obviously this is kind of a normie media studies scholar, but a very interesting one for a lot of people. And I want to know what if he influenced your work and in what ways. And
so McLuhan as a person is far less normie than a lot of people realize. Dude was very strange and like the most endearing and inspirational way possible. McLuhan has not been a huge influence on my work so far. However, it's becoming a bigger influence. Specific, the thing that's most well known from McLuhan is his idea that the medium is the message. Right. And by that, what he mean, well, one of the things he means a lot of things by it, because he was very multi-level thinker. There's a lot of different layers to everything he's saying. He's one of those guys that was, whatever he says, like he's like 10 steps ahead of you when he said it. Part of his idea with the medium of the medium is the message, is that the form that a communication takes, even before you put the words or the symbols or whatever into it, already has meaning that's there and that you can't get rid of. That's already part of what it is. and that's a very powerful idea in semiotic terms, because what you would say about that in semiotic terms is that there are some signs that are part of this particular message that are inherently part of the message itself. They're not added on top of it. But then you when you add other signs into it, other words, et cetera, onto it, you are it becomes the base that you build on. And so that some media are better for conveying certain kinds of messages than others. Very broad stroke example of that is like, think about what you can convey in a visual medium that you can't convey just in a spoken medium, right? Because I could be making we're in a visual medium now, so like I'm moving my hands, you can see the books on the shelf behind me, whatever else, that become part of the message, right? Because like you may have someone you're listening to squinting to see what the books are on my shelf, right? They become part of what I'm saying because I'm in my apartment, right? So those are probably part of my influences, behind me on the wall, so that they're someone may see a book and is like, oh, we read that book. Okay, now this thing he said makes more sense to me because I know how that person that wrote that book thinks, right? But for anybody that's listening to this, I don't know if you do an audio only version of this, but if anybody's listening to audio only, like they have no idea what the hell I'm talking about because they can't see any of this, right? So there are things that and this is a very broad, example. This is not even like some of the subtlety that McLuhan was working with, but in this very broad example, like there are obviously some things that are part of this communication in one medium that were not there in another medium. Now, when you get more subtle with it, you can get down to pretty finely grained ideas of what the medium is. Thinking about, for example, like if you're looking at a web page, it's like a very old kind of web design, like, and like what an old web page looks like, right? It maybe miss certain features that we see in common on the way we communicate on the web now. You may not be able to like, hold your mouse over a link and see certain things, or maybe, the font can't show, some of the letters that we're used to seeing now. So like you're literally missing part of the words because they're not showing up, as opposed to like a very modern design web page. I mean, those are kind of two variations of the same kind of medium, but they're each like their own kind of sub media in and of themselves, as well. And when you get into that level of subtlety around what exactly does this type of medium good at conveying, you can go pretty deep on the way you can start with the implicit message that the medium itself conveys, and then what you add on top to that message to make something more complex on top of it. So yeah, the other place where McLuhan actually does intersect with my work in a big way, and this is McLuhan, somebody I've been aware of for a long time, but have not really looked at closely until fairly recently. But later in his life, the French philosopher Jean Baudrillard became very enamored with McLuhan's work. Baudrillard is most well known for the idea of the simulation and simulacrum. And it's not. He's not that we're living in a simulation. That's other people's ideas. This is more about the idea that as we have like copies of copies of copies of copies of cultural things, eventually like we lose sight of what the original thing was. And so like we're interacting with that thing in a different way, even though we think of it like it's the original thing, but it's not anymore. The kind of detached way that our culture is kind of like endlessly remixed itself. But Baudrillard died in like 2003 or so, I think. So maybe like the last 5 or 6 years, he became very enamored with McLuhan's work and saw that as McLuhan is very much a kindred spirit. And I'm very influenced by Baudrillard's work. In fact, what I put forth in the Languages of Magic as a word that I prefer instead of magic is the word semiurgy. Going back to my website, semiurgist.com, etc. For Baudrillard, semiurgy was the creation and the wielding of signs, which is a very magical thing to do, especially if you think of magic in semiotic terms. So there's definitely a bit of like McLuhan influence that's coming at me from different like different angles, both directly and indirectly, which is kind of interesting right now. I've also been I can't remember if we were recording when we started this or not. Someone mentioned I think it was Nick actually mentioned me being on the Hermetics podcast. One of the frequent guests on the Hermetics podcast of the last several years has been a guy named Bob Dobbs, not the subgenius guy, although the name, that's funny coincidence in the name. But Dobbs was uh, basically a close associate of McLuhan. Dobbs is in his 80s at this point, but has fantastic stories to tell about McLuhan, but also has a very deep understanding of McLuhan's work, and is probably one of the more, even though he brands himself as a renegade McLuhan scholar, he's probably one of the more astute people on the scene now talking about McLuhan's work. Definitely somebody worth looking into, just as an aside.
Well,
I
not
don't
to
know if that's where
dox
you want to go
myself.
with any of that, but that's kind of my wind me up on McLuhan and let me go for a little bit idea.
No, that was amazing, and Toby, thank you so much for that. I just want to say that I, not to dox myself, but I did study under Marcel Danesi, so I'm
Nice.
quite familiar with like McLuhan's work and his like sort of
Excellent.
books and media studies perspective, and Bob Dobbs. Obviously, I've actually seen him live, I believe, at
Oh,
the
great.
Monk Center. So yeah, so it's definitely something that, like, when I remember being an undergrad, and he, sorry about that, and he said this, like, semiotics is magic. I
Mhm.
remember being in the introductory class, and we opened our textbooks, and he said, yeah, semiotics is magic. Like, what is your name?
Well, they both work. They both work in a similar way. The differences are subtle, but they are there. But they both work in a very similar way. Is that both semiotics and magic are not designed to compel something to happen in a certain way. If I want to turn on the light, the most straightforward way to turn it on is to get out of my chair and go turn on the damn light. I don't need magic to go turn the light on, or magic to help me out of the chair so that I can make it across the room. Right. So there are things that can be controlled through strict cause and effect. Go deal with a group cause and effect. Don't waste magic's time doing that kind of stuff. But semiotics and magic both work by tilting the balance towards certain things happening. Like in semiotics, you're conveying a certain network of signs that contain your intent. And you may have one or more signs that are very salient within that web that are kind of like the dominant ones within that are like, hey, pay attention to me. Those kind of signs. But you can't make anybody do anything with a sign. You can plant the idea that they'll go do this with a sign. But the more effectively you do that, the more likely it is that you will get the result that you're looking for by putting signs out there. That's basically how magic works in a broad sense as well, is that you're working with cracks in reality where reality is not quite set in stone yet, because if it's too rigid, then you don't need magic, you need a sledgehammer. If it's too loose, you got to get it in a more stable configuration for it. So you're looking for the places where things are almost but not quite set the way they need to be, and then you give that last bit of nudge and let things work themselves into the configuration you desire them to be. So yeah, so that semiotics is magic. I mean, that's basically there, and that's part of why, it's one of the reasons I wrote the book, right? I the languages of magic. I joked around before that it's depending on which way you look at it, it's either a book about semiotics disguised as a book about magic, or it's a book about magic disguised as a book about semiotics, because there is that very kind of commonality in the way they work, and that's also why it's also interesting. People that work directly with semiotics even in the academic world, tend to be very open to new places to use semiotics to understand how something fits together, how it works. And so studying magic as a semiotic process is something that that people that don't even think of themselves as magicians, like maybe like an academic, philosopher that works with semiotics, still finds that interesting as a way to apply it, as a way to understand it, a way to see that there's a commonality in how things work. So
Would
yeah,
you
you've got some very cool stuff in your background. I want to hear more. You should maybe drop me an
so
email if we talk about that.
Yeah, I'd love that. Thank you, Toby.
so would you say that is there any equation where each element is necessary to create a specific, let's call it a magic spell for a specific intention or purpose? Is there a code? Is there something that can be followed, or there are so many variants that you have to try endlessly until you finally find something that works?
Well, I think it's endless variants, but I think it is the more you do with magic, the more you'll find what works best for you. You know, Don Webb talks about this quite a bit, actually, in his book, How to Become a Modern Magus, which is, I think it's his latest book on magic. The idea that you want to have as rich of a toolkit as you can build, but you know you have to get used to how the tools work for you, because like the same tools may work differently for you than they do for me. You know, because we have certain talents, we have certain ways of thinking about things, maybe certain ways of relating to the world, you know, certain ways that we communicate our intent, etc. So like it's always going to be very individual, but I think for each individual person, yeah, you can. I don't think you can ever get to the point that you have, you know, the bucket of guaranteed success and you just pull out these
Sure.
things and that's all you need. But you have the like, look, this thing works for me most of the time. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to start from here, and then I'm going to like add on other stuff depending on what exactly the current moment needs. And I think as you do that over time, you'll build up. It's like, okay, these are my go-tos. But that can also be its own trap, right? Because just like with words, you used to speaking in a certain way, you know a certain language. Well, that's going to constrain in some ways, not a rigid constraint, but just it's going to predispose you towards thinking in certain ways, because this is how the word you normally use to describe something, etc. So we always have to be careful in magic not to go, but I always do this and it always works. Well, maybe this is the time you need to do something different, right?
Sure.
But yeah, so I think it's over time you build up that idea that you have, okay, look, these are the things that I go to. These are things that tend to work for me. These are things that if it doesn't work in a particular situation, I know this tool well enough, this particular technique or whatever well enough that I can modify it in the moment to work in a slightly different way, etc. But yeah, you don't want to get so caught up on but if I don't do it this way, it's not going to work. That you become so rigid in your approach to magic that you're missing out on other ways of approaching problems. Think of magic as like a type of applied problem solving.
I just questioned that because being rather ignorant in this, I tend to look at what is normally understood as a spell, right?
Mhm.
And most of the spells have, for most people, nonsensical sequence of words, right?
Yeah.
Or even nonsensical use of groups of letters that convey words that are not known in any language. So I was wondering if there was some kind of a method where you use specific tones according to your own way of expressing, to your own frequency, and then seek a way to finally obtain something that works from that. So if you go to ancient texts, you find the witches' spells that are using words in sequences that make no sense, and people would say it's a witch, because the way she's speaking conveys a different meaning to the language itself, right? Or the way that is expressed. So I was just trying to figure out if there was a very basic method where you build upon that to create what you want to do. So that's basically what I was trying to get to. I'm sorry if it's confusing.
Well, no, I mean, you have to start with
the question I was going to ask next, but go ahead. Sorry.
No, just real briefly on that point. Some of that is where that starts. I can't tell you how it ends because that's where you have to figure out.
Yeah, exactly.
But where it starts is finding those pieces that resonate with you, the thing that calls to you, the feeling that just feels right, and then as you start to work with those things, this is why keeping a magical diary is absolutely critical for anyone who considers themselves a magician. Is that you have to be able to honestly assess how did it go, right? And so that's where you can catch yourself in the tendency of the, man, I've been clinging to that tool because I like that tool, maybe it was the first one I used, but like it's just not working anymore because you got the diary and you can see it. It's like, oh yeah, well, did it the last 5 times I did that, I got jack for what I was trying to do. Maybe I need to look at a different tool, right? So there's that constant self-reflective thing. Because like with the Greek magical papyri, and I keep going back to that because it's a good example for a lot of the things that I center magic around. That's not a single coherent body of work. It's a bunch of documents over 4 or 5 centuries, depending on when you where you draw the lines, and but the reason they're kind of grouped together as magical papyri is because there's some commonalities in the techniques and the approaches and the words that they use and things like that. But it was very experimental. They were probably passed around in the same way that like the Goldrbike or the books of magic were passed around like an early modern Iceland. The idea that if you knew somebody that they do this kind of work as well, and you go, well, do you have any spells that do kind of this stuff? What's worked for you? And you borrow it, and you'd make your own copy of it, and then now it becomes part of your toolkit. And then like you decide, maybe you try it for yourself and go, I didn't do anything, throw it out. Or maybe you do and it's like, you know what, I think it needs this, and you try it again, you experiment with it. So like it already, even if you're taking it from something that somebody else did as a starting point, it starts to become more personalized to you as you work with it, and you decide, well, what's really working for me over time. And yeah, I'm a big believer in that idea of the don't be afraid to pull from different traditions, different schools, different approaches from what you're used to, because you never know what you're going to need at any one time. You never know what's going to become like, oh, that's my go-to technique now. I'm gonna run with that one for a while until it stops working for me.
Yeah, you
Uh,
cannot use the same key to open different
right,
doors, basically.
right. But you have to be able to look back and honestly assess. Do I keep using this because it works? Or I keep using this because I like it. Right.
It's true.
Yeah, and that's
Right.
where you have to have that kind of brutal self-reflection as a magician, and the magical
Sure.
diary is a critical component of that.
And the universe is in constant motion. So what worked before, things are
Exactly.
not as they were before. So you need to adapt that key to the movement of the cosmos, of the spheres, or
Right.
as they move along. Yeah. Thank
Right.
you.
Right. So one last very quick thing on that, and I promise I'll get to your question, Lisa. Um, um,
Oh, sorry, Lisa. Sorry.
so this is absolutely critical piece of Egyptian spell work that's we use within the Temple of Set, and I think it's useful beyond that as well. It's from a papyrus called the Bremner Ryan Papyrus, and it's part of an ancient spell that's the Keferu formula. There's different ways to translate it. The translation that Don Webb uses, and it's usually one that I stick with or similar, is that so Keferu. So I have come into being, and through the process of coming into being, has been established. That's a bit of a mouthful, and you notice how I have to use a long string of stuff in English to do what is like three short words
Yeah.
in Egyptian. But the gist of what that is, and the reason why that's so important, is what I brought into being, the way that I brought something into being this time, the way that I created being out of nothingness, the way that I carved out from the the unknown vastness of being for this particular manifestation of being, is never going to work exactly the same the next time. It's going to be similar. I can build on it. I can take it as a starting point, but I've established this way of coming into being, but then the next time I may have to establish a new way to come into being. And there's lots of different directions that goes off into. They're extraordinarily useful in initiation as well as in magic, but relevant to your to part of what you're talking about there is the idea that you have to be constantly reinventing yourself. That doesn't mean starting from scratch every time. It just means being on the lookout for what needs to be tweaked for this particular instance, this particular context, this particular situation, to do what's called for here, and not just to do it this way because, well, I did it the way 2 weeks ago.
Sure.
So that kind of reinventive process is extraordinarily important. And in order to effectively reinvent, you have to be able to honestly know what you've been doing and what has been working, what
Sure.
hasn't been working as well.
Like Yoda says, always in motion, the future is. So
Yeah.
you need to be
Yeah.
aware of that.
Oh yeah.
Go ahead, Lisa.
To build upon what y'all were saying, and I am also very new to this. I'm here to learn. What you were talking about,
Me too.
well, the title, Infernal Geometry, was one of the spins. And then with the talk of isosophy, which Nick and I had done an episode about it. And in it, we talked about magic squares. And so you had mentioned Pythagoras. And so that reminded me of his magic squares, you know, the 3x3, which you get a 9. And when you add, say, the name of an archangel, right, and you add in the numerical value for each letter, you get a sigil. Is that true? Is that correct? And so when you look at
that was one way that sigils were created, yeah.
That when you look at how numbers represent a letter and they give rise to geometry, is that kind of the concept with I guess magic and sigils and the power of a word in a sense?
Yeah. Well, it's one way with working with them, because you have to find meaning in different ways. We were talking earlier about mathematics as geometry, mathematics as music, mathematics as astronomy, but that underpinning all of them. So like you're kind of, each one tells you something different about the thing that you're looking at. So like no one of them by itself is the thing itself. Each one is like, it's like a facet of the thing itself. I'm a big believer of using tools that let you look at things in a variety of different ways. Literally, looking for it from different angles, right? So that you can see the entirety. You can see the entirety of the thing. Because one of the things that's interesting about interesting is not unique to humans, but one thing that is interesting to, let's say, all living things, is their sense processes are always limited in some way. In humans, for example, we can only see visible light within a certain range. We can only hear within the 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz range, et cetera. So there's any sense that we apply to interacting with the world is already limited in some way. That's the same thing with language. We were talking earlier about the wide variety of sounds that humans create versus the number of sounds that are used in any particular language. So there's already some limitation there. But there's even limitations in meaning. Limitations in words. Once I describe, if I have like some crazy experience, some profound experience that I had, once I describe it in words, I've cut off part of the experience. Now, maybe I can still think of it because I still know what it felt like. Maybe I can visualize something that I can't describe. But if I'm describing it to you, there's always a limit to what you can understand about my experience, because it was not your experience. It was my experience. Now you can maybe get a very good sense of that if you've had a similar experience, and because of the words that I use to describe it, it maps onto your experience in a way that lets you kind of get a deeper sense of what I'm talking about beyond just the words, right? But it's still limited in some way. And so that's why I find like tools like what you're describing, it's very handy to have tools that let you see those different perspectives on things to get to what is the entirety of a thing, instead of mistaking just this one way of looking at it for being the entirety of the thing. Does that make sense? Yeah, I've not worked extensively with what you're talking about, although I work with sigils quite a bit, but usually more of the kind of the word method type sigils from Austin Osman Spare.
Okay.
But but they work broadly in a similar way. The idea that you have some particular concept, some idea, some principle that you're trying to convey, but you're working with some sort of a system that lets you carve out part of it in order to represent the whole. I talk a bit about that a little bit in the languages of magic. That's a linguistic thing called metonymy, where you use like part of something to, or something closely associated with something to represent the entire thing. Like for example, we refer to like journalists as the press, even though no one uses the printing press anymore, right? Um, the thing associated with them kind of stands for the whole thing, but it's not the entirety of that thing, you know. Um, but that's when we work with magic, we're very often we're working in a very metaphorical, analogical type of way, where we're we're conceiving of something as part of our magic in a certain way that has a relationship with what we're trying to bring about. But they're not the same. We're looking at, trying to think how to put this. We're looking at some part of what we're trying to create through magic, and we're focusing on that. That's where I'm going to direct my magic into that little bit right there, and it's going to, affect the rest of the concept that I'm trying to create. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, that
Cool.
does.
But yeah,
This
that's why I'm a big believer in those type of tools, just because you need to have different perspectives on the thing you're trying to understand or thing you're trying to create, so that you can find what is the most effective. It's like, that's where I'm going to get it right there.
Have you ever
Yeah.
used Burroughs's cut up method?
Oh yes, yeah. I'm a big fan of Burroughs's work in general. I actually talk about language as being a virus a bit in the languages of magic. But yeah, that was a technique that was adopted very early on by the chaos magic folks. Um, I was talking with my friend Dave Lee recently. He's like one of the OG chaos magic guys. Was like right there at the beginning with Carol and Sherwin and etc. And that was one of those early things that they kind of brought in, that was like not magic in the conventional sense, but they realized, wait, this is magic. Why are we not using this as part of the magical work that we do? Um, and I love, with Burroughs especially, I love that kind of free form, kind of improvisatory, like go with what's in the moment that you need kind of approach to magic. And Burroughs, I mean, for those who don't know, I'm sure you're aware of this, but those who may not know, Burroughs considered himself a magician. He understood what he was doing as magic, and in fact, later on, he even joined up with the Illuminats of Thanateros, the Chaos Magic organization, because he recognized, hey, you guys are taking what I'm doing in a new direction. But yeah, the cut up is a very interesting method. For those listening who may not know, the cut ups have a wide variety of purposes. But it's the idea that you take like a very kind of easy example. If you take like a magazine, right, and you cut out different pieces of different images, different pieces of pages, and you reassemble them in new ways to make something new out of it. That whether it's randomly or going by the aesthetics of what you're trying to look at, etc. But it's not at all dissimilar to magical work of reassembling a reality. You're basically taking pieces of what's there to work with, what's there as part of what's available for change, and you're creating something new out of it. And sometimes you can use this in like a divinatory way. Like if you take like a written page out of a magazine, cut it up, reassemble it, read the words the way they're arranged now, and sometimes you find, oh, that's a different way to arrange things. We've talked a lot about syntax and rearranging words as part of this conversation. Or maybe it's more of a visual thing. Yeah, it's a very ripe kind of magical technique, whether is like a divinatory type purpose, or as a I'm going to rearrange these things to create a new vision of what I want to be.
so if this makes sense to you, you spoke about sigils, and I'm thinking about the influence that a written word can have on a glass of water when you've frozen the water after you left the word on top of on the bottom of the glass. So could a word be a sigil in the sense that is affecting the water, and it has no sound, it's just a written word? Does it become a sigil, and that's why it affects the water?
Think about that for a second. Well, Yeah, one way to think of sigils, and this is common whether it's ones created from magic squares, sort of the old school Agrippa style sigils, or if it's the word method type sigils or other techniques. It's a method of distillation. You're taking the entirety of the concept, the statement, whatever you're working with. You're distilling it down to something that represents, it's one small piece of it representing the entirety. In your specific example, I'm not sure, partially because I've not worked with them in that way, but
He's
that's
talking
an
about
interesting idea.
He's talking about Veda Austin's work. If you ever get a chance, get on Instagram and look up Veda
Hmm,
Austin. She
okay.
puts pictures and words next to ice before she puts it in the freezer, and these images come through
Huh,
as it's freezing. So there's a really weird conversation happening between water and symbols.
Yeah,
interesting.
for instance, if you put the word love
Hmm.
beneath a glass of water, and in the morning you freeze the water, right?
Hmm.
When you look at the microscope, the crystal will be beautiful, perfect, symmetric, magnificent. If you write the word hate and you do the same process, it will be chaotic, deorganized, and there is no intention. It's just a word. So you were speaking, and I'm thinking maybe words can become a signal if when they are used in this way. So I'm sorry, this is comes right from my lack of knowledge in this, but I'm just
No,
trying to
so
to
it's my lack of
you know.
knowledge too. That's an interesting idea. Um, yeah, I don't know. I have to experiment with that. That's a cool idea.
I'm sorry, I'm just making
I don't,
weird questions. So I'm sorry.
no, I'm fine if you guys want to play stump the guest too. That's always fun. Um,
Toby, get those little plastic petri dishes,
well,
and you can just
and
do a
the other
whole
thing,
series.
yeah. Well, the other thing, like, probably you've noticed this in the last two things. Like, if I don't know something, I'm not going to bullshit you about it. I'm not going to make up stuff. I'll just tell you I don't know, or that I haven't seen it before. I mean, because I'm here to learn too. Because like I learn from the questions that y'all answer, y'all ask, and the audience asks, because it's either it's ways I've not thought about this before, which is always good to get, but it's also like magicians and techniques like I'm not familiar with, because maybe that becomes part of my toolkit. Who knows? So
Yeah.
no, it's great. But yeah, I'm not like, if I don't know something, I'm not gonna make shit up for you.
Sure, I don't remember the
I'm
name, but
not that kind of guest.
in
Yeah,
in my
no.
in my case, I listened this from a Japanese fellow that I can't
uh,
remember the name.
yeah.
But I think he was the first Matsumutsu or something like that. I can't remember the
Hmm.
name, but he discovered this, that the simple word written with intention can affect matter, right?
Hmm.
And that can be found by just freezing and then looking at a piece of that ice into a microscope, and they are completely different according to what you write, and the two different results come from these two simple words:
Hmm.
love, like written not in a specific intentional way, like all capitals. You just write the word love, but when you're writing, you're thinking about love. And when you write about hate, you are thinking about hate. And that affects the water, although the water is not connected to the process of creating the word itself. So what I was thinking is by writing it with intention, you might be creating a sigil. But I don't know what a sigil is in a sense. So I'm just ignorant in relate to this, but I just connected the two things, and I was trying to see if there was something to it.
I mean, I would say in a broad sense that would be a type of sigil, because it is you're encoding something into it that is not gonna. Because one of the things with sigils is that if you do it right, and pretty much every technique of working with sigils will suggest this. If you're doing it right, you can't take just the sigil and be able to reverse engineer it to get back to what the original thing was. Is it's meant to be a distillation where certain information is lost or is encoded in a way that's beyond um, rational understanding at that point. Um, yeah, I mean, normally in my own work, and this not exclusively like this for everybody, but in my own work, I tend to use sigils when I'm trying to implant something for myself. basically to put something deep beyond just the rational mind, so that I can make sure that I remember something, or that I know something, or that I think in a certain way about something, etc. Um, but other people tend to use sigils more for operative, outward-facing things. But that's just a quirk of my own practice and preferences. Not that it has to be that way, or that it excludes other ways of working with it.
Sure, it's Masaru Emoto. If you want to look at it, I think
Okay,
it's the roots. Masaru Emoto. It's the
thanks.
name of the fellow. Yeah.
Awesome. I did want to ask you a question, Toby. That's actually a little bit more specific to your book. And I kind of like wanted to hear, and I do want to hear the answer, and I think it's actually just interesting for the listeners. You do kind of, from what I got out of it in your the first book, you kind of contrast angular and circular magic. First, it's kind of like a two-part question, if you don't mind maybe giving as basic as you can of an understanding of those two, and then how do you kind of pair them with left-hand path and right-hand path?
Sure. So this division between angular time and circular time is sort of originally inspired by a work called The Hounds of Tindalos by Frank Belknap Long. He was one of Lovecraft's many correspondents. Long was actually like a very young man at the time, like 1929, I think, was when the story was written. And so he corresponded with Lovecraft, like took advice from him, because Lovecraft was very generous with advice for aspiring writers. Fritz Leiber, Robert Bloch, people like that, other people that were mentored by Lovecraft to a large extent. But anyway, in the story, The Hounds of Tindalos, I don't want to give it away because it's a very, very cool and interesting story that's sort of written within the Cthulhu mythos. And Lovecraft later uses the hounds as well. But there's this idea of introduced of curved time and angular time. What circular, is the perspective of time from, like, in the objective sense, like looking at the clock on the wall, it's been 30 minutes since whatever. Now, as we all know, magician or not, we know that the subjective experience of time is different. It could have been a short 30 minutes, or it could have been a long 30 minutes, depending on what was happening, right, during that period of time. And so what this becomes is that in angular time, this is the time is experienced by an individual sentient being, in their experience of time. It can stretch, it can compress, etc. Things maybe happen in different order. Like you maybe have like some great insight that kind of circumvents like a long process of reasoning, etc. Now, what this becomes is part of. I'm just gonna. It's not gonna be helpful for people just hearing this, but I'll give it my best. So this image on the cover of Infernal Geometry, you see you have a circle, then you have a pentagram, then you have a trapezoid, and only the trapezoid is connecting the pentagram and the circle. So the pentagram and the trapezoid are what we call the nine angles, from the ceremony of the nine angles. Okay. So it starts off, the first one is the trapezoid in the upper right, and then it goes to the, sorry, backwards. Well, I guess upper, yeah, upper right, upper left is, because it goes left, of course, left-hand path. So the first four angles are the trapezoid traced thus, and then you go back to the beginning with the pentagram, and then those five traced. Okay. So if you're tracing them in terms of, because I'm trying to look at the camera while I'm trying to get my finger around the corner here, so give me a second. So if you're tracing them in terms of the angles, you're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and so forth, right? But if you're tracing them around, you would go 1, 5, 2, 8, what was that, 4, 6, 9, etc. So there's different ways of tracing that figure in an angular way and in a curved way. Okay. So I'm trying to figure out how to talk about this in a succinct way. But in terms of your general question around the left-hand path, think of this in terms of the left-hand path is dependent on the way that you subjectively understand things. As you as the thinking, acting subject, working against or with, depending on what's needed at the time, the objective universe, which is the things outside yourself. That's the the universe of matter and the laws that govern it. It's the people and other sentient beings within that. It's basically everything outside of your own subjective self. So you work with this idea that time for me internally is different than it is for time outside myself. It's perceived in a different way. We can work with it in different ways. We can use it in, like, for example, Lovecraft described in stories like The Haunter of the Dark and The Dreams in the Witch House, he even saw angular time as this kind of gateway to different dimensions of way of working with non-conventional reality, working outside of just what is the province of everyday experience. Now, within the left-hand path, there's this idea that not only do we stand apart in some way from the natural world. Doesn't mean that we dislike it. Doesn't mean that we ignore the natural world. It just means that we have something that is separate in some way from it, and that's what is developed as part of the left-hand path. This idea that we become more potent, aware, capable, understanding within ourselves, and that this is projected outward in some way. It's known by its effects in the world outside ourselves. Okay. The way that angular time plays into that is this idea that sometimes when you have a different experience of time in a given situation, you're not in control of it. Maybe it's you're stressed out or you're super happy or whatever, and it's going to affect the way time flows. But what happens when you control it? What happens when you sort of slow down time yourself? Your perspective of time, and I'm well aware that I'm not necessarily, unless I'm traveling near the speed of light, I'm not slowing down the passage of a second in the objective world. I'm talking about the passage of a second within my subjective self. What you find is that you can find more nuance in what you're doing. You can find those gaps in your understanding that maybe were not visible when you were just blazing past it at the normal rate of time. When you're engaged in some sort of a creative process, let's say, like, for example, you're writing a piece of music, and this is an example I go into I illustrate within the book. The way that process looks internally, according to my own sort of angular clock, the way that I process time within myself is going to be different from what someone watching me create the music or rehearse it or whatever is going to see. And like you may even have normal examples you've seen of this. Like if you ever watched an elite athlete, and you watch them do moves within a space of time that you can't even understand someone moving that fast. Well, if you ask them what they are experiencing, for them it's like, oh yeah, I had all the time in the world to do that, to do this one move, and you're like, but that's not what I saw. But that's right. It's because you're seeing from the outside as opposed to what they're experiencing from the inside. So that kind of being able to speed up and slow down your perception of time is crucially important for magic, but it's also crucially important just for anything that works with the world outside yourself, because you need to be able to interact with it on your own terms. That's a critical part of the left-hand path. It's I'm deciding how this interaction is going to go. But it's also in terms of trying to have a better understanding, a more deeper understanding of who am I as part of this, to be able to, to speed up or slow down that perspective of yourself as someone acting within time, because we can't escape from time. We're, we've been talking for an hour and 50 minutes now, right? at one level, that's an hour and 50 minutes I'm never going to get back. But on the other hand, I'm having a great time. On the third hand, going back to Lovecraft, I guess. On the on yet another hand, if I couldn't see that on my screen, I'm putting my hand up where I can't see it. And you asked me how long I've been talking, I would have said maybe 30 minutes so far. I don't know, right? Because you don't really, we're not always aware of doing this. But if I deliberately decide, you know what, I'm going to make this hour and a half last as long as I can, that opens up possibilities to you that weren't there before as well. So I guess to make a long story short, and yet too late, I know that's the case
No,
with
that's
me.
fine. It's okay.
But a lot of it's about that, how you can manipulate and work with your own perception of time in order to open up possibilities that weren't there before. But see, if I just
Sure.
said that one sentence, so you would go, you didn't answer my question, man. Whereas if I say that to sum up what I just said, it's like, now it's like, oh, that makes sense. Or at least I hope it
Sure.
makes
I,
sense.
I'm used to get late to work when I had a boss, and I did try to slow time down so that I don't get too late to work, and it in my mind it did work. So it's all a matter of using that plasticity that time is in terms of your perception and what time, and you can actually see the time on a clock take longer to cause. That might be your own self activation creating it to yourself, but
Mhm.
it might be real, right? It all depends on your ability to use that intention and transform time itself, or the bubble where you are set into.
Mhm.
Did anybody have any other questions before we start to wrap it up?
I was going to ask a more simplistic question. Could you, for the audience, and especially for me, because I don't know, what is the difference in the relationship between the Temple of Set and the Order Trapsoid?
Okay, so within the temple, well, let me back up for a second. So for those who may not know, so the Temple of Set is an organization built around the religion of working with Set. We don't like the word Setianism very much, but say like the Setian religion, if you will. So it is religious, although not all members see it as a religion. Some of them just see it as a magical organization, and that's okay. But we do work with magic. We consider ourselves to be engaged in initiation, basically improving ourselves. But one of the things that's sometimes misunderstood about the temple, because the name Temple of Set, is they assume, oh, it's only about Egyptian stuff. That's definitely not the case. It's never been the case. The reason it's a Temple of Set is, for us, that is the oldest, as we understand it, that is the oldest name that we as humans know of for the figure we sometimes refer to as the Prince of Darkness. Um, it's been known by many other names, Set, Odin, Marduk, Tezcatlipoca, etc. But Set is probably the oldest such name for it that we know of. And so that's that kind of like getting back to the roots kind of idea is part of why it's there. Now, we do work quite a bit with the Egyptian ideas, but definitely not exclusively those. And in fact, I'm probably kind of middle of the road and middle of the pack in terms of like focusing on Egyptian ideas. I mean, I'm well versed in it, but it's not my focus. Now, within the temple, and this is makes more sense with that idea that it's not just an Egyptian thing. We have these groups within the temple called orders. Now, orders are led by masters of the temple. They're people that have reached certain levels of a certain degree of initiation within the temple, and orders are sort of like, if you think of like a university, you have like the university of wherever, but then it has like the college of arts and sciences, it has the college of business, it has the college of this. So think kind of like the orders are like individual colleges within this broader thing that is the Temple of Set. Now, I personally am a member of two orders within the temple. That's not an uncommon thing to have happen. There are, I don't know, I don't want to go. I want to sit down and think about the whole list, but it's like 8 or 10 orders active at the moment, something like that. Um, that that focus on specific areas of magic, specific areas of understanding of set, or understanding of the things that we do. Now, the Order of the Trapezoid is one of those. I'm the Grand Master of that order. I'm part of a different order, but I'm not the Grand Master of that order. I'm part of the Order of Tiamat as well, which works with Mesopotamian magic and related ideas. So the Order of the Trapezoid has its roots in the Church of Satan. It was an idea originally sort of created by Anton LaVey, even though it never was really a formal thing within the Church of Satan. It was just kind of, it was it was an idea that he had, that there was a sort of kind of rarefied thing behind, like the movers and shakers behind the church, that the Order of the Trapezoid is the board of directors, the security staff, but it also had very Germanic, like looking at runes and the figure of Odin and things like that. Because Anton didn't really know much about runes, but he was very well versed in and very enamored with German expressionism. Things like the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, Metropolis, those great movies from the and art, etc., from the 1920s in Germany. Anyway, so when the Temple of Set was founded in 1975, that the Order of the Trapezoid as an idea was kind of kept as a similar sort of thing. Then later, 1982, by Michael Aquino, who was the founder of the Temple of Set, at did a in response to some things that were happening within the temple, did a working that he came to understand more deeply what he saw as the idea of the Order of the Trapezoid, and what he realized is that it's focused on things like runes and the like, where it was kind of like almost like a yin yang kind of thing with what we were doing with the some of the work in the temple. The idea that you need like a different way, a different perspective, a different alternate perspective of looking at some of the ideas that we had about set and magic and so forth. And so it became, alongside several other orders at the same time, became orders that were specific to specific ways of looking at magic, specific ways of looking at the figure of Set and related figures. And so to this day, the Order of the Trapezoid is largely focused on, broadly speaking, well, really, it's broadly speaking about Runa. Runa is a ancient Germanic word meaning the mysteries or mystery. In fact, like the oldest long form written text in any Germanic language is the Gothic Bible, written by the bishop Uphalas, sometime around the year 400, I think. Around the 4th century, in any event, where he was translating the New Testament from ancient Greek into the Gothic language, which is a Germanic language. It's now extinct. No one speaks Gothic still, at least as a first language. And so Runa was like the way that the word mysterion from Greek was translated. So that's how we know that it means not just mystery, like where my car keys go, but like transcendent mystery, right? The idea that there's a hidden reality behind things that we have to discover in and of ourselves, because that's how the word mysterion was used in the New Testament. It was referred to like the mysteries of God, the mysteries of the crucifixion, etc. Now, in practical sense, a lot of what we work with in the Order of the Trapezoid is like things like runes. We work with Odin as the particular form of the Prince of Darkness that we kind of interact with, which is different. I'm not definitely would not say that Set and Odin are the same god, but that they are both through culturally determined ways. They're expressing something essential about what it is to be a self-aware, self-evolving a being within the cosmos. And so now we also work with broader things, which is Runa. Mystery is the connector more so than the Germanic things, but just so happens that many of the things we're interested in are Germanic things, like the runes, the cosmology of the and Poetica. I think is along those lines. So yeah, so I mean, it's not entirely accurate, but the easiest way to describe it is like we look at basically the more kind of Germanic type forms of magic and religion and initiation, um, even though it kind of goes a bit more broadly than that.
I would
Because
assume
like
that's
so like for myself, that's I mean, I mentioned like I don't work as much directly with Egyptian ideas, even though I'm relatively well versed in them. You know, I tend to think more in terms of the kind of the Germanic orientation. Because I'm also part of the Rune Guild, which is an initiatory organization founded by Stephen Flowers that works with the runes and works with it doesn't the Rune Guild is an initiatory organization, a magical organization. It's not a religion, even though there are people within the guild who are also true, work with the Norse gods in certain ways. But yeah, it's just different. It's a different approach to magic, a different approach to the mysteries of the cosmos, a different approach to what it means to be a self-aware, self-evolving being. So there's different ways to look at it, and that's where the university metaphor is kind of apt, because like you're learning whatever college you're part of, but you're learning through the lens of business in the College of Business. You're learning through the lens of some sorts of arts or sciences in the College of Arts and Sciences, etc. So you may learn the same things, but from different perspectives and with a different orientation, with a different concentration and focus, if you will.
Mjolnir is kind of a trapezoid too. That's kind of the shape of the hammer.
Yeah. 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 I don't know if it was. I doubt there was any kind of explicit connection to it, because like a lot of times, and a lot of the more trapezoidal ones are newer designs, although there are some historical antecedents for those. A lot of the oldest designs that are generally agreed to be hammers are they would just look up like a T, or even just like a cross. Now what you do see, the very trapezoidal figure, is what's come to be known as the Valknut, the knot of the fallen. Even though that is an Old Norse name, but that is a name that's assigned to that figure afterwards. We have no idea what it was actually called, or even if it even had a name. But that's that's the three triangles interlocked with each other.
Right, and it shows up oftentimes in the figure of Odin's horse, like where the legs are at. And so,
Right.
to me, that kind of implies some form of shamanism associated with that symbol.
Yeah, it almost exclusively shows up in in images with Odin. Yeah, often, not always with Sleipnir, the eight-legged horse, but often. That was probably some association with it, and I don't know who gave it the name the Valknut, which means the knot of the fallen. Val is the same root as in Valkyrie and Valhalla. And Knut is not fairly obviously. But yeah, it's a that's the thing. Almost anything you read about that figure is speculative, but I mean, it feels so. Whenever multiple people speculate the same thing about a symbol like that, they're probably onto something, even if we can't prove it, right?
Well, I think the artistic representation sort of put it into those different positions as being relevant. So like binding, unbinding, and like destruction. Mm-hmm. Those are all sort of bound up in that same sort of sigil.
Right. Well, you can also think of it, and again, this is speculative, so no one shoot me if you think about this differently, but because it's all speculative with that figure. But another way to look at it is that it's representative or connected somehow with weird. Because if you think about, if you have the three triangles that are interlocked, if you're holding a figure in your hand, there's three triangles that are interlocked, like you can't pull it apart. That arrangement is not going anywhere. It's stuck. Well, that's what weird is like. Weird is what has been laid down in this. It's configured in the way that it happened. Whatever actually came to be, that was it. That was the way it happened. But if you had the three triangles, like, it wouldn't be, you couldn't pull them apart, but you could still maybe wiggle them a little bit. Well, you can still wiggle your perception of the past You can still think of it in certain ways. You can see ways that you could look at it this way, you could look at it this way. Two events appearing differently to different observers. It's like that bit of wiggle room.
Hugin, the two crows of Odin right there too. So you've got sort of that same kind of dual perspective on things.
Right. Well, and even there, it's they're named Hugin and Munin, right? So it's mind and memory, broadly, and what those two things in interaction with each other tell Odin or tell anyone else that would work with those concepts. And that's also, I think it's in the Grimnismal, one of the poems in the Poetic Edda, where Odin says that that every day the ravens, I don't remember the exact line, but every day they fly out, and like I fear that Hugin won't come back, but I fear even more that Munin won't come back. If you think about it, you have to have effective thought requires effective memory. If you've ever been around someone with dementia, which unfortunately, a couple of people in my family have dealt with that. It's one of the things that happens when someone is losing their ability to form or to recall memory, is they lose the ability to think rationally as well, because they can't hold the things in mind to think about them in a meaningful way. So yeah, there's a lot of wisdom encoded in that's I mean, the one thing that bugs me to no end about myth, and this is a very modernistic way that people see myth, is that like, oh, it's just like bad science. They just understand how the world works. It's like, yes, there's some parts of myth that was attempts to explain natural phenomenon, but so much of myth is really about encoding. This is what matters. This is what matters to us as a society, because sometimes you have in mythology around like the gods, like this is portraying the ideal arrangement of our society. But in other cases, like Hugin and Munin, it's encoding certain things that they understood, and the people that heard the stories would have not just thought, "Oh, it's a story about two ravens." They would have understood, yes, but it has this significance. This is why the story matters.
Remote viewing.
Well, yeah, you got to send them out to bring you back knowledge. Yeah. Well, and even and that's the thing. Even the Old Norse term for one Old Norse term for magic, Galdr, um, ultimately comes from the same roots as the root for the sounds that Raven makes. So there's a very deep connection that's there as part of it. Um, and if you we don't have a lot of information about how runes were worked with in in olden times like that, but we have a lot of clues that tell us that these are probably related to the ways they worked with. And the idea of speaking, go back to our ideas about word magic, the idea of like chanting certain things, and sometimes it's actual words, sometimes it's gibberish. There are runic formulas in the Elder Futhark, 2,500 years old, that are not actual words. So it may have been glossolalia, it may have been, they're trying to create the sounds have the magic, the word doesn't have the magic, that idea. But if you've ever spent much time around ravens talk all the time. Crows are not the same. They're related birds, but they're not. Crows are smaller. They're less chatty. Ravens talk all the time, and ravens are also fascinated with people. That they hang around, and not just because they're wanting us to give them a crumb. Like they're just fascinated by. I don't know if they think we're just weird ravens. I don't know what they're thinking, but
shiny objects. They love shiny objects.
Shiny objects, right? But like they're talking all the time, and they're talking in ways that like that sounded like it had intent. That was not just like a random. Wasn't a bird song. It's not beautiful speech, but like you hear them, and like it sounds like they're talking to each other, because it just sounds like you can't understand it, even though some people, according to the saga, some people can understand it.
Language of
Sure.
the birds. That's what they called the language before the Tower of Babylon, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, in here they cut a line that is beneath the tongue of the tongue of the raven, and they are they start to speak much like humans and much less like birds when that is done. So
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
because
Yeah,
the tongue gains the ability to move much more. So it's a terrible procedure, but it works. They start to speak normally, but almost normally. You can understand everything they say, and they can understand almost 400 words. Some of the birds, so
Yeah.
it's a lot.
Yeah, so
Well,
this is just very
sorry,
close
Toby.
relationship between ravens and humans.
I just want to jump in and say, after Ricardo's point, is that in Sanskrit, the word for twilight language, Sandyavasa, it literally means, besides twilight language, the words within the gap. So again,
Nice.
sort of bringing it back to the angle, right? Like the
Mhm.
downward
thank you.
pointed V.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there you go.
Nice. Did anybody have any other questions before we wrap it up? It's been a minute now. All right. Well, I think Toby, that was amazing. Thank you so much, and everybody on the show too with all the
Thanks so much
questions.
for having me back. You guys always have great questions. It's always really fantastic discussion. Yeah, happy to come back on anytime. Just let me know what you want to talk about.
Oh, I'm sure we will have you on again. Before we wrap it up, would you like to let everybody know where they can find your work and all your stuff again, please, sir?
Sure. So, recapping a bit from the beginning, so you can find me most easily in a couple of places online at infernalgeometry.com, as well as that's kind of my older site. And the one that's a bit more current is at semiurgist.com, semiurgist.com. And that has contact information for me for social media. It has an email address if you want to write to me. Please feel free to write if you want to talk any more about any of these things or beyond.
Awesome.
And you can find my two books, Infernal Geometry and the Left-Hand Path. Actually, I have that right here. Infernal Geometry and the Left-Hand Path, which was what we occasionally talked about tonight.
Yeah.
And then the newest one, The Languages of Magic. You can find them wherever books are sold. The Intertraditions has very wide distribution, so they should be easy to get hold, easy to order, if not find in your favorite brick and mortar store.
Awesome. Thank you so much again, Toby. And again, for the people who are listening that may not have heard the first episode, definitely go check that one out. It was just as good as this one. Thank you again, Lisa, Jin, Headless, and Ricardo for coming on. That was awesome. Great questions. Again, this was a chat that went better than I could have expected, And thank you, everybody in the chat. Went awesome. A lot of great stuff in there. People seem to really have been digging it. That's what's up. I appreciate you all jumping in on the live. And until the next one, everybody be well. Later.